My wife stood in that courtroom and shouted, "You never served. You lied to my father and stole his house." I didn't utter a word, just calmly handed the judge a folder. A second later, he called in the military police and had the courtroom sealed. My name's Jackson Cross, and I won't sugarcoat anything. I've seen some dark corners of this world in my 45 years. Nearly half of that time, 22 years, was spent in the army. I wore the rank of major, bore the weight of confidential missions, and carried secrets that would eat away at most men. I led operations that were never supposed to happen. The kind where if you came back at all, it was a miracle. I've cradled soldiers in their final moments, told them lies about home just to ease their passing. I've delivered folded flags and unread letters to front porches where women screamed and collapsed before I could finish my sentence. I remember one assignment near Fallujah. Can't go into details, but I spent 3 straight days in a foxhole half filled with muddy water, mortars screaming overhead like banshees. Martinez was bleeding beside me the whole time, and all I could do was press my hand to his wound and pray to a God I didn't know if I believed in. He made it out of that hole alive, but not back home. That's what we did. We survived, or at least, we tried to bring each other out alive. I've driven through ambushes, crawled from burning wrecks, and watched comrades vanish in an instant. I thought I'd seen it all, but nothing, not war, not betrayal, not death, prepared me for what came next. Nothing readied me for my own wife turning on me like I was the enemy. No gunfire, no explosion, just a courtroom in Portland that smelled of old varnish and quiet resentment, a place where truth was supposed to matter. Instead, it became the battlefield where Nora, the woman I'd loved, trusted, and shared a life with, tried to erase me completely. She stood there across from me, trembling not out of fear, but rage. That tightly wound auburn bun she always wore when she meant business, those sharp green eyes burning with fury I'd never seen before. Her voice cracked as she accused me, lied about my past, claimed I'd manipulated her father on his deathbed to take his house, and the room froze. Everyone turned toward me. The judge, the attorneys, even the spectators who'd probably shown up expecting just another messy divorce drama. All of them looked to me to say something to defend myself, but I didn't, because if there's one thing the army taught me, it's that silence can be your strongest weapon. Sometimes it speaks louder than 100 words. So I stood, slowly, not rushing, not flinching. My dress uniform weighed heavily, the medals and patches feeling more like burdens than honors. Each footstep echoed like a drumbeat on the courtroom floor. I moved like I was crossing enemy ground, careful, steady, unshaken. I walked right up to the bench. The judge looked down at me with raised eyebrows, probably wondering what I'd do next. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just reached into my coat and pulled out a tan folder, scuffed, old, held together by a tired rubber band. The kind of folder only certain people know how to recognize. The kind that makes people nervous. I placed it gently on the polished wood in front of the judge, like I was placing down a live grenade. And in a way I was. The sound it made, a faint rustle, sounded louder than her shouting. Because that was the sound of truth being set down. The judge froze. His fingers hovered over the folder, as if he could feel the weight of what it held before even touching it. Behind me, I heard Nora gasp, felt the shift in the room. Her lawyer leaned forward like he already knew something had gone terribly wrong for their side, and still I said nothing, because some fights are won through speeches, debates, or clever spins. But others are won by letting the truth speak for itself. I'd spent too many years watching good men die over carefully crafted lies whispered by politicians who'd never fired a single round. That kind of reality teaches you to value the harsh honesty of cold, hard facts. When the judge flipped open that folder, I noticed the flicker in his eyes, barely noticeable, but just enough. Enough to tell me Nora's game was about to take a turn she hadn't planned for. She thought she had the upper hand. She didn't realize the tide had already shifted. That worn folder held 2 decades of my life. Commendations, declassified. Mission logs, records of my service to a country that often demanded more than it gave. But it contained more than proof of my loyalty. It held something heavier, something that was about to flip this courtroom drama into a war zone she wasn't equipped to survive. I walked back to my chair in silence. No outbursts, no explanations. Let them make assumptions. Let Nora keep throwing her barbed words like darts at a wall. The truth doesn't shout, it waits. Waits for the precise moment when silence speaks louder than screams. You want to know The real story behind that house? It wasn't a mansion, wasn't even pretty. Most people driving down that cliffside road would probably laugh at the sight of it, a tired old thing barely clinging to the rocks above the Pacific. It had 3 small bedrooms, paint flaking off the sides like brittle paper, and windows that howled when the wind rolled in. Not just creak-howled, like ghosts still trapped inside, trying to tell you something if you stood still long enough. But it was mine. Every crack in the walls, every stubborn board that refused to stay nailed down, every sigh that came through the vents at night, it was mine. That home had survived storms, salt, and time. Judge Franklin Weston handed me the keys, like he was passing down a legacy, and in some ways, that's exactly what he did. Franklin wasn't just Nora's father. He had that rare ability to see through a man like glass, to recognize what was buried beneath the surface. The first time I met him, I was on edge, trying too hard, stiff in my dress blues, hoping the uniform would win him over. He barely glanced at it before gruffly saying, "Lose the posture, son. I can spot a combat vet in a crowd, and you've got the look." He wasn't wrong. Franklin had served in Vietnam back when judges had grit under their fingernails and stories they didn't tell at dinner parties. From that first meeting, he treated me not as a guest, but as family. He never had a son who stuck around. Miles got caught up in his boardroom fantasies, and the girls? Nora chased power like a dog chases cars, and Karen was too busy dressing up causes for brunch conversation. But Franklin and we got each other. On Saturdays, we'd tackle the house together. I learned how to mud drywall the right way, helped him put up gutters sturdy enough to outlast those brutal coastal rains. I still remember him pausing while we replaced warped planks on the deck, hammer in hand, saying, "This place has soul." My grandfather laid its foundation with purpose. That's what holds it together, not concrete but intention. He had rebuilt every inch himself over the decades, not because he couldn't pay others to do it, but because he believed in work that meant something. The kitchen cabinets? Oak he'd sawed from a downed tree on the property. The floors? Pulled from a demolished warehouse he helped clear out back in the 80s. Even the bathroom tiles had a story, handmade by a California artisan Franklin had met over bourbon at some legal summit. When the illness came, it was merciless. The kind that doesn't argue or hesitate. Soon he couldn't lift a hammer anymore. I'd find him on the porch, 2 beers already open, watching the sea like it held answers he was running out of time to hear. I'd drive in from the city, sit beside him, and we wouldn't say much. We didn't need to. Some things don't need words, just presence. The silence between us was the good kind, the kind that wraps around you like a well-worn coat. The sun melted into the horizon, brushing the sky with those rich, aching colors that make grown men bite their lips. It was on one of those evenings, watching the tide crash against jagged stone, that he first mentioned his will. "That place is yours, son," he said, not looking my way, just watching the surf roll in and out like it always had. Miles never cared about the work it took to make it. And the girls? They see it like another investment property. But you know what it means to build something that outlives you. I started to argue, told him he ought to keep it in the bloodline. He shut me down with that same dismissive wave he'd used my entire life. "You are blood, Jackson, closer to me than the ones with my name on their birth certificates." When he passed, I held it together until the dirt hit the coffin. That sound, I'll carry it with me forever. After the burial, we all met in that musty office where his lawyer, a relic from another time, read out Franklin's last words. Leather chairs, mahogany shelves, thick glasses, felt like I'd walked into a noir film. Nora and Miles inherited Western Holdings, the family's golden goose. Karen was given 2 luxury condos downtown and a bankroll big enough to keep her little art foundation thriving for decades. And me? I got the house. The house Franklin built nail by nail, beam by beam. The one place he ever let himself be fully human. They seemed okay with it. Nora smiled, even gave my hand a warm squeeze. Miles nodded like he saw it coming, and Karen hugged me so tightly I could smell the expensive soap she always used. Said Franklin got it right, but hindsight, man, it's got perfect vision. I should have caught the flicker in Nora's expression, should have felt the weight in Miles's handshake, like he was testing my grip for weakness. I'd spent years in combat. I should have known the most dangerous strike always comes from the hand that looks friendly. 3 weeks had crawled by since the funeral. I was just starting to find a rhythm in that old house perched above the cliffside. You know the feeling, you memorize which step groans at night, where the shower knob balances between glacial and lava. The place had waited for me longer than I realized. Most mornings, I stayed busy. That day, I was out front replacing a loose railing. The salt air had aged the wood to silver, but it still had strength. Just needed a few new screws and the right kind of patience. Fog was rolling off the Pacific in thick waves, the kind that turn your backyard into a ghost story. Classic rock played from an old radio Franklin left behind, and for the first time in a long time, I felt still. Then came the sound of tires over gravel. Not a neighbor. A courier van, the kind they send when something matters too much for regular mail. The driver was young, maybe 25, looking like a kid trying too hard in a uniform a size too big. He held a clipboard like it weighed 100 pounds and approached me like he was about to ruin my day. "You Jackson Cross?" he asked. "Already?" Knowing the answer. "Yeah. Got a certified delivery for you, sir. Gotta see some ID." I showed him my license. He handed over a thick envelope sealed with a golden crest and the type of paper you could probably sharpen into a blade. Just seeing the return address turned my stomach. Hartwell Morrison and Associates. Portland's most elite legal sharks. The kind of firm that bills by the minute and doesn't return your call unless you're a millionaire or a murderer. I tipped the kid $5 and watched him drive off like my driveway was cursed. Smart kid. Inside, I set the envelope on Franklin's kitchen table, the one he built himself. It was scratched and stained, but like everything he made, it had gravity. I stared at the envelope for a long time. Part of me already knew. The other part just wasn't ready to be right. When I finally opened it, the documents spilled out like snakes. Legal jargon, formal stamps, and a suffocating number of whereas and hereinafter referred to as. But my eyes locked on the only words that mattered. Civil complaint, fraud, forgery of military records, filed by Nora Cross, my wife, the woman who used to drag her fingertips across the scars on my back and call them battle medals, the woman who'd once whispered, "You're the realest thing I've ever known." Now she was accusing me of conning Franklin, said I forged my entire service record, lied about rank, lied about deployment, manipulated a dying man into handing over property I hadn't earned. They claimed the house was obtained through deception, that it rightfully belonged to his biological heirs. But here's what rattled me. They weren't guessing. The complaint listed mission names, operation dates, even medal citations. Someone had been peeling back layers of my military history, like they were searching for rot and found just enough to twist. Not because I was faking. Hell no, but because I was part of missions that never officially happened. Black ops, covert deployments. You get used to seeing entire years vanish from your records for the sake of national security. That's why some of my files looked inconsistent. It's protocol protecting lives, not building resumes. And Nora knew that. She'd heard the explanations, seen the classified designations, knew why some names and places were redacted into oblivion. And now she was using that knowledge like a scalpel. The betrayal wasn't just legal, it was surgical. It was planned. This complaint, it wasn't whipped up overnight. It had fingerprints from months of research, months of smiling beside me in bed, whispering sweet nothings while secretly writing my downfall. No heads up, no conversation, no warning. Just an envelope that felt heavier than any bullet I ever carried. I didn't cry. I haven't cried since Kabul. But I did stand there for a while, staring at that table, thinking how much damage a person can do when they pretend to love you. Long enough to learn where all your scars are, and exactly how deep to cut. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything or punch walls like in those overly dramatic movie scenes. I handled it like a soldier under fire, calmly, methodically. I evaluated the situation, checked what I had at my disposal, and started preparing my response. I went up to Franklin's old study, a space where he'd spent years analyzing legal files and crafting his precise opinions. Hidden in the back of a closet behind some dusty law books he never donated was my own file. The one I'd kept sealed and hidden for years, hoping I'd never have to touch it again. 3 weeks after I submitted my complaint to the Department of Defense and kicked off my own investigation into the tampering of my military records, someone knocked on my door. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. I remember because I was in Franklin's old recliner, sipping bourbon, watching a documentary about warfare on the History Channel. I muted the television when I heard the tires crunch on the gravel. Outside sat a silver BMW, spotless and expensive, a rolling advertisement for someone who wanted the world to know they had money. I recognized it immediately. Damon Kellner, Karen's husband. The outsider who married into the Weston family and had been trying ever since to prove he belonged. Damon was the type of guy my drill sergeant would have called pampered. He'd never broken a sweat for anything in his life. Worked in tech. Some vague consulting job filled with meetings and flashy presentations, but with nothing tangible ever coming out of it. At family get-togethers, he'd hover around me, asking about military ops and weapon systems like he thought he could soak up some grit just by proximity. But the man who stepped out of that car wasn't the slick talker I remembered. He looked shattered. His hair was a mess, his high-end shirt was wrinkled like he'd slept in it, and even from the window, I could see his hands trembling. When I opened the door, his face was drained of color, eyes scanning the shadows like he expected something to jump out at him. He kept glancing back toward his car like he wasn't sure if he should stay. "Jackson," he said, barely audible. "I need to talk. It's serious." I stepped aside. No questions. Just let him in. He sat on the edge of the old couch like it might bite him. His hands were clamped so tight his knuckles were bloodless. "You want a drink?" I asked. "You look like you need one." "No," he said quickly. "God, Jackson, I don't even know how to say this." He ran his hand through his already wild hair. "I wasn't supposed to know. I wasn't even supposed to be near Karen's laptop when it happened. But I was working from home. My system was doing updates, and she told me I could use hers for a video call." He paused to take a breath, steadying himself. That's when I saw a new message pop up. It was from Nora. The subject line read, "Phase to complete." Before I could stop myself, I clicked on it. His voice hardened, the fear in his eyes turning to fury. That email. It opened my eyes. These people are monsters, Jackson. They've been planning this for a long time. Maybe even before Franklin died. Definitely since the will was read. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small USB drive. Just a cheap plastic stick, the kind you buy in packs, but he held it like it carried the secrets of a nation. "I copied everything," he whispered. "Emails, files, every piece of this disgusting plan they've cooked up. I know I'm violating confidentiality rules. I know I could lose my job, but I can't look the other way anymore." I took the flash drive. It was light in my hand, but it might as well have weighed a ton. "What exactly is on this?" I asked. "Evidence," he said. "They hired a private cybersecurity firm. They've been breaking into military systems, altering your files, every negative record, every falsified detail, all of it carefully crafted to destroy you." He stood up and began pacing, unable to sit still. "They call it comprehensive character destruction. They're not just trying to beat you in court. They want to ruin your entire identity. No job, no credibility. You become a warning story, the guy who faked his service record and got caught." "Why?" I asked, though I already had a feeling. "Money," he said, bitterness in his tone. "It's always money with them. If they prove you lied to Franklin, everything he left you gets pulled back into the estate. The house, the insurance policies, the trust fund he set up for your future kids, even the antique cars, all of it. And that's not all. They're gearing up to sue the VA for your disability benefits." I could feel the room shrinking around me, the weight of what he was saying crashing down hard. I knew Nora could be ruthless when something was in her sights, but this was something else. This was premeditated sabotage. "There's more," Damon added, his voice dropping again. "They've got someone on the inside at the Vabble, a mole. The changes to your record weren't random. They were built to match the story they want to tell in court." He pulled a folded paper from his other pocket and handed it to me. "Draft press release," he said. "They're planning to leak it to veteran groups, blogs, anywhere they can get traction. Once the case picks up steam, they'll release this, make it go viral. Your name, your reputation gone." I didn't say a word. I just stared at that piece of paper like it was a grenade waiting to go off. The momentum was brutal. Local man exposed as military fraud. Stole estate from revered judge. I stared at the headline on the front page, heart sinking. The story twisted every detail of my life into something rotten, a detailed takedown, portraying me as a lifelong fraud who impersonated a soldier, targeted grieving patriotic families, and exploited the legacy of fallen heroes. It wasn't just defamation. It was a public execution, designed to ensure that even if I emerged victorious in the courtroom, I'd be disgraced forever. "Jesus," I whispered. Damon exhaled deeply and dropped back onto the couch like the weight of telling me everything had hollowed him out. They don't want to win a lawsuit, Jackson, he said quietly. They want you erased. They want to rewrite everything, make it seem like you were never a part of Franklin's life, never served your country, never earned your medals. He looked over at me with something flickering behind his eyes, respect, maybe even guilt. But they miscalculated one thing. I actually care about you. You were the only one in this whole messed up family who treated me like I was more than Karen's arm candy from the tennis club. And what they're doing to you, it's twisted, strategic, but cruel. In my hand, the flash drive pulsed with significance. It held truths they never expected to see daylight. I glanced at Damon. How bad is this going to be for you? He chuckled, but the sound was hollow, all edge and no warmth. I'll probably be slapped with a few lawsuits. Karen will definitely file for divorce, maybe even criminal charges, depending on how deep this goes. But honestly, he stood, straightening, like a soldier deciding his own war. I can handle all that. What I couldn't stomach was standing by while they demolished you and pretending it didn't matter. He walked toward the door, paused, and turned with finality in his voice. I'm filing tomorrow morning. Karen can keep the house, the vacations, all of it. But I won't stay married to someone capable of this level of betrayal. They think they're fighting a war, Jackson, but they've never seen what real war looks like. You have. Use that. The Multnomah County Courthouse loomed like something out of a Gothic nightmare. The moment I stepped through the enormous oak doors, I felt its purpose, to humble anyone who dared enter. The ceilings soared above like a warning, the stone floors sent every step echoing like rifle fire, and the walls bore the faces of long-dead judges who looked as if they'd never known mercy. I'd walked through places far more dangerous, crumbling structures in Baghdad, booby-trap compounds in Kandahar, but nothing felt quite like this. This place was built not just to enforce the law, but to intimidate those seeking its protection. My lawyer met me just past the metal detectors. Carmen Vega was all business, a former Army JAG with 2 combat tours under her belt. When Major Ellison connected us, he said she was the only person he knew who preferred confrontation to comfort. She looked me up and down with a calm, battlefield-ready focus. You good? She asked. I've been ready since they made this personal, I answered. Still, nothing could have prepared me for the ambush waiting inside. The courtroom was packed, media crews lining the back wall, cameras pointed at every corner, and Portland's elite attorneys and judges seated like they'd bought tickets to the event of the year. Word had spread. Apparently, watching a decorated soldier get torn apart was the new courtroom theater, and there she was, Nora, sitting at the plaintiff's table like a queen headed into war. Scarlet blazer, fitted and fierce, power color, her armor, her auburn hair was coiled into that severe bun she always wore when she wanted control sharp enough to pierce steel. Next to her sat Miles, looking every bit the polished executive, his expression smug and certain. He looked at me like this was already over, like the game had been won before I'd even walked in. Their legal counsel Harrison Caldwell stood beside them, a man known in these circles as a courtroom killer, silver-haired, cold-eyed, always composed. He made a career out of dismantling lives with a smile. Everything about their setup screamed strategy, money, influence. They weren't just here to win a legal dispute, they were staging a public assassination. Judge Patricia Morrison called the court to order, her voice cutting clean through the noise. The room stilled as protocol began. Then Caldwell stood. His tone was measured, deliberate. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Every word carried the weight of practiced precision. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, pacing slowly, like a lion surveying the weak. This case is about betrayal. A man entered the home of a dying judge, a man who believed he'd found a kindred spirit. He offered trust, compassion, and what did he receive in return? He paused, let the silence simmer. A lie. A long, intentional lie. Mr. Jackson Cross fabricated an entire military career, invented battles, medals, honors. He played on the judge's deepest values, on his loyalty to this nation, and in doing so, manipulated a vulnerable man into leaving him a vast inheritance. An inheritance built over a lifetime of honest service. He turned to the jury with cool intensity. The evidence will show that this was no misunderstanding, no confusion. This was a calculated deception designed to rob a family of what was rightfully theirs and stain the memory of a man who served the law with distinction. He let the words hang. It wasn't just a lawsuit anymore. This was war, and they'd brought tanks, Cross's military file was riddled with errors, dates that didn't line up, medals that were never awarded, assignments that had no official record. The prosecution wasn't just accusing me of fraud. They were accusing me of something far more profound, stealing the dignity owed to real veterans. Every statement was sharpened to wound where it cut deepest. Caldwell painted me not as a man, but as a parasite, one who fed off patriotism, manipulating grief and trust for personal gain. And the jury was soaking up every bit of it, their expressions turning darker with each revelation. When Caldwell concluded, silence swallowed the courtroom. Only the clicking of cameras and the scribbling of reporters' pens filled the air. Then came his first witness, a forensic accountant who outlined troubling changes to Franklin's finances, patterns that conveniently coincided with my presence in his life. But the punch that landed hardest was from their so-called expert, Dr. Angela Ross, a psychiatrist who specialized in elder abuse. She had never seen Franklin in person, never spoken to him, yet she stood before the court and testified with polished detachment that he had been emotionally coerced. Her theory? That I had manipulated a dying man through emotional bonding, false stories, and carefully timed betrayals. It was all conjecture, but it sounded clean, clinical, and damning. The jurors stared at me like I was some heartless predator. That's when Nora rose to her feet. No permission, no request, just raw, unfiltered fury masquerading as moral outrage. "Your Honor," she said, her voice strained with emotion, "I can't sit here while these lies go unchallenged." Judge Morrison didn't shut her down immediately. Maybe curiosity held her back. Or maybe it was something else, a silent recognition that sometimes truth storms in uninvited. Nora turned and faced me. Her green eyes were wide, her cheeks flushed. She looked like she was about to detonate. "You never served," she shouted, the words flying like bullets across the courtroom. "You lied to my father. You took advantage of him when he was dying. You stole that house." The room exploded. Reporters yelled over each other. Cameras flashed like lightning. The spectators whispered like a rising tide. Judge Morrison banged her gavel, calling for order, but Nora kept going. "He's a fraud," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He robbed real soldiers of their honor. He destroyed our family, our name, our legacy." All eyes were on me now, expecting me to unravel, to prove her right by exploding with rage or spewing out denials. But I didn't. I did what 2 decades of service had taught me in moments of chaos: breathe, assess, act with precision. Once the room settled, Judge Morrison looked down at me. "Mr. Cross?" she asked. "Do you have anything to say?" I rose slowly, not in defiance, not in desperation, just steady, controlled movement. I picked up the tan folder in front of me, the one I'd brought to every hearing, but never opened in court, and I walked it to her bench. Each step echoed through the silence. The courtroom might as well have been a war zone, tension hanging in the air like smoke before a firefight. I wasn't just walking toward the judge. I was walking into history. Judge Morrison watched me approach. She was sharp-eyed and seasoned, the kind of judge who'd seen it all and believed very little. She was known for cutting through theatrics and rewarding restraint with respect. I placed the folder on her bench. No speech, no drama, just action. I treated that file like a live explosive, delicate, dangerous, and vital. The room fell completely still. The only sound was the soft shift of paper against wood as I let it go. The judge looked at it, then at me, then back again. Her fingers hesitated just above the folder's edge, like she knew that what she was about to find might unravel everything. That had come before. Behind me, I heard Nora suck in a breath, felt Caldwell's posture shift, trying to see what card I'd played. But I stayed silent. In the military, timing was everything. Silence could be as deadly as any weapon. This was one of those times. Some battles are fought with rhetoric, with charm and cunning. Others are won with plain, unfiltered truth. Judge Morrison opened the file. I watched her carefully. First came curiosity, then surprise, then focus, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the documents with growing urgency. She flipped through each page like they were answers to questions she hadn't dared ask out loud. The first document was my original DD to 1-4, my unaltered discharge record. Every operation, every commendation, every transfer, real, verified, untouched. Then came the Bronze Star citation, dated and signed correctly. I saw her lips press together when she reached the Fallujah report, the one that detailed the day Martinez bled out beside me in a dust-choked foxhole while we waited for air support. But what truly shattered the prosecution's case was deeper. In the file, I'd spent nearly a month assembling this offensive. With Major Ellison's network, I contacted intelligence operatives, combed secure archives, and chased leads until I had what I needed: emails. Dozens of them. Some were from Corin's recovered desktop copied onto a drive by Damon without anyone noticing. The rest came from a private investigation, documents recovered from a shady cybersecurity firm hired by Nora and her brother. These weren't rumors or guesswork. These were receipts. Message after message laid out a clear agenda: discredit me, challenge the will, block my access to the property, and make sure the public never saw me as anything but a fraud. Nora's words hadn't come from grief, they'd been rehearsed. Caldwell's accusations hadn't been about justice, they'd been strategy. And the court was about to see that. The tide had turned, and not even the loudest lies could drown out the truth anymore. The timeline laid bare how meticulously they had orchestrated the demolition of my reputation. One email, dated half a year before Franklin passed, made their intent impossible to misread. Once the old man is gone, we move quickly. Jackson's the only obstacle to us getting the full inheritance. Military records are online. Now, find someone to tweak them, nothing dramatic, just enough inconsistency to cast doubt on his service. That'll be our way in when we dispute the will. Another message, this one from Miles to a tech consultancy, sealed the next step. Funds transferred for phase 2. Begin tampering with his social media footprint. Get press contacts warmed up. The smear campaign goes public the moment the civil suit starts picking up attention. We want complete reputational collapse. Push the stolen valor narrative. Make sure he can't get a job again. With each page, Judge Morrison's expression hardened. This wasn't petty family drama or financial quarrels. These were blueprints for methodical defamation, organized like a project proposal: timelines, assigned personnel, backup strategies, even KPIs. They'd turned destroying my life into a team effort with budget approvals. Then came the payment logs recovered by military investigators, digital wire transfers to the tech firm, contracts with private eyes who'd been shadowing me for months, invoices from both the forensic accountant and the psychiatrist who'd testified in court. These experts hadn't been neutral, they were brought in and prepped long before the legal proceedings even began. But the nail in the coffin was an audio file, a phone call between Nora and Miles, secretly captured during a larger cybercrime investigation involving the very firm they'd hired. The courtroom fell utterly silent as it played. "Are you sure this will work?" Nora's voice, faint but clear. "Don't worry," Miles replied, his tone almost bored. "By the time we're done, Jackson Cross will be untouchable. No employer will want him. No veteran group will stand by him. He'll regret ever getting near the Westons. And the house? Once we prove he conned Dad, everything goes back into the estate: the house, the life insurance, that trust fund for his imaginary kids. That's nearly $4 million. Nora laughed. Then we've got 4 million reasons to erase him. The conversation continued, casually venomous, as they strategized like executives planning a hostile acquisition, not of a company, but of a man's identity. They spoke about exploiting Franklin's legacy, manipulating patriotic sentiment, and launching the media attack when it would hurt the most. Judge Morrison gently closed the folder. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes burned with something deeper than anger. It was the cold fury of someone watching the justice system be used as a weapon by people who had no respect for its purpose. She looked around the room, the journalists with their cameras, the spectators packed into the gallery, the attorneys shifting nervously. Then she spoke, and her voice had the steel tone of command. "This proceeding is halted," she declared. The announcement rippled through the room like a tremor. People exchanged glances. Someone near the back whispered, "What's going on?" The bailiff stepped into motion, closing and locking the courtroom doors. 2 more officers appeared from side entrances, quiet, deliberate, efficient. One stood behind Miles and Nora's table, the other near the gallery exit. That's when it hit me. Judge Morrison had seen the truth for what it was. This wasn't just a civil dispute anymore. It was now a criminal matter, and the courtroom had become a crime scene. "No one leaves," the judge said firmly. "This court is now under federal lockdown. We are awaiting the arrival of U.S. Marshals. All evidence is to be secured immediately, and all involved parties will be interviewed on site." Nora went pale, her hands gripping the table like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Miles was sweating bullets, the full weight of his corporate sabotage crashing down on him all at once. Their attorney, Caldwell, was frantically flipping through legal documents like he could find a magic clause to stop what was unfolding. I turned slightly and caught Carmen Vega's eyes. For the first time since I'd met her, she was smiling, no, beaming. Like she'd just watched Goliath fall to the ground with a single, precise strike. She leaned toward me and whispered, "You didn't have to say a word, Jackson. The truth already spoke louder than you ever could." Outside, black SUVs pulled to the curb. Federal agents stepped out, swift and coordinated. Justice, long delayed, had finally arrived. The precision of the whole thing made it clear this wasn't thrown together overnight. Major Ellison's connections inside the Pentagon had done more than help me gather proof. They'd worked hand in hand with federal agents to ensure the truth wouldn't just come out, it would crash through the courtroom doors. As the U.S. Marshals filed in, I finally turned to look at Nora, the woman who once kissed the scars on my body like they were holy wounds. The woman who lay beside me whispering love while plotting my ruin. Her expression wasn't anger anymore, it was something colder, more brittle. Maybe shock. Maybe the first flicker of real fear. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth was finally louder than any of their lies. The next 2 hours unfolded like a building being demolished beam by beam. Everything Nora and Miles had engineered, every scheme, every forged detail was coming apart right in front of them. Judge Morrison halted the civil proceedings on the spot, announcing that an in-depth federal inquiry was now underway. She used words like cybercrime, fraud, and identity theft against a U.S. veteran, not just terms from a law book, but actual charges that could send them to prison for a very long time. Then came Special Agent Rebecca Torres. She stepped in with calm authority, the kind of presence that silences rooms. Late 30s or early 40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, she moved with the quiet certainty of someone who spent her life hunting people who thought they were untouchable. When she addressed me, it was direct, professional. "Mr. Cross," she said while her team began tagging and bagging the evidence, "we've been building a case against the tech firm that altered your records. What you reported to the Department of Defense set off alarms. We've been tracking their digital communications for about 6 weeks now. 6 weeks. That meant they'd been observing Nora and Miles while they set their trap, while they prepped witnesses, while they smiled for reporters thinking they were in control. The Bureau had let them hang themselves." Agent Torres continued. "This case has widened considerably. We're looking at breaches of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, a conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of veteran services, and what looks like a well-organized identity theft network targeting several military service members." That last part hit hard. I barely got the words out. "They've done this to others?" She nodded, firm and grim. "Yes. The firm your in-laws hired has a long history. They specialize in manipulating reputations, doctoring military histories, forging criminal records, inserting fake data into background check databases. It's a for-profit operation for high-net-worth clients. Your case just happened to reveal their sloppiness." I looked across the room. Nora and Miles had retreated to a corner with their attorney, visibly shaken. Miles looked like he was melting under the pressure, mopping his soaked forehead with a useless handkerchief. Nora's earlier bravado had vanished, her face pale. Her eyes emptied. As Agent Torres read out the full list of violations, their whole scheme became a blueprint for criminal stupidity. Dozens of forged federal documents, each carrying a potential 5 to 10-year sentence. Add conspiracy to defraud and obstruction of veteran compensation, and they were facing an avalanche of federal time. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Then she mentioned something I hadn't expected. "There's another layer," Torres said, flipping a page on her tablet. "We've uncovered multiple fake charities registered by Mr. Weston under your name and service record. Wounded Warrior Foundation of Oregon, Veterans Support Network Northwest, Heroes Home Initiative." On paper, they were raising money for disabled veterans. In reality, they were funnels designed to legitimize fraud and line their pockets. My stomach turned. Rage was part of it, but mostly it was revulsion. They weren't just trying to ruin me, they were stealing from the very people I had fought beside. Men and women who'd left pieces of themselves on foreign soil. People who deserve dignity and help, not to be used as bait for donations. "How much?" Carmen asked beside me, her voice barely above a whisper. Torres looked at her notes. "Preliminary totals show more than $2 million collected under false pretenses over 3 years. $2 million. Money that could have paid for therapy, housing, surgeries. That could have pulled families back from the brink. Instead, it had been funneled into private bank accounts while veterans struggled to survive. I looked at Miles. His eyes were glassy now, his face a mess of disbelief and sweat. Nora looked like she'd been knocked off her axis entirely, her mind finally catching up to the consequences. That money could have saved lives, could have stopped suicides, could have given hope to the same warriors these two had chosen to exploit. And now, finally, justice was answering. He let out a strangled sound and collapsed forward in his seat, as if a bullet had ripped through him. His attorney, suddenly pale, was scribbling furiously, probably trying to calculate how many years behind bars his client was now facing. What had begun as a local scandal centered on fake military credentials had exploded into something far more sinister. Outside, what was once a cluster of journalists covering a sensational stolen valor case had morphed into a frenzy. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a national scandal. Through the high courtroom windows, I could see the number of news vans multiplying by the minute, their satellite dishes rising like weeds after a storm. The buzz had reached the country's pulse, and the media was now ravenous. Damon stood off to the side with Agent Torres and her team, his expression caught between anxiety and relief. It takes rare courage to expose your own blood, but he'd done the right thing. And when our eyes locked, I gave him a small nod. It wasn't much, but it was the kind of gesture soldiers use, silent, but full of meaning. A nod that said, "You did good." Then, from the back of the courtroom, a figure stood. Margaret Weston, Franklin's widow. At 78, she was a portrait of Grace, white-haired, dignified and quiet. She hadn't spoken much since the investigation began, but when she rose, something shifted in the air. Even the agents paused. She walked slowly, her cane tapping against the polished floor like a slow drumbeat. No one looked away. Her children, Nora and Miles, stiffened as she approached. If they could have vanished into the floor, they would have, but they couldn't. Not from her. She stopped at their table and gazed at them, not with fury or sorrow but with something harder, something unmovable, cold, final. "Your father," she said, voice soft but commanding, "would be ashamed." Nora tried to interject, desperation creeping into her voice. "Mother, please," but Margaret lifted one hand, silencing her daughter more completely than any judge's gavel could have. "Don't," she said. "There is nothing to explain, nothing to defend. You betrayed everything your father stood for. You didn't just chase wealth, you trampled on decency. You robbed veterans. You smeared the name of a man who gave his life to justice." Then she turned to face me, her eyes glistening but not spilling over. "Jackson," she said gently, "Franklin loved you. What he said in his will, that you were the only one he trusted, it had nothing to do with money. It had everything to do with your integrity. He saw in you the kind of man who lives by principle, who sacrifices without asking for thanks, who doesn't need praise to do what's right." From her purse, she pulled out an envelope. It was old, edges yellowed with time. She held it out to me. "He wrote this after your first tour in Afghanistan." He meant to say it in person, but kept it, just in case. In case he never got the chance. Took the envelope with both hands. The writing on the front was unmistakable, Franklin's careful script. It read, "For Jackson cross the sun I never had but always wished I did." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the clicking of pens, the rustle of papers gone. Everyone watched. Margaret turned back to her children. When she spoke again, it was with the clarity and judgment of a closing bell. "You're not welcome in my home," she said, voice steely. "You are not welcome at the table. Not at holidays. Not in my life. You are no longer my children. Your father and I gave you everything, and you used it to build something twisted. You traded respect for power, traded kindness for cruelty." Her cane echoed with every step as she left the courtroom aisle, measured and unhurried, leaving the wreckage of her family behind. Behind her, Nora was unraveling. Her sobs weren't rehearsed anymore. They weren't manipulative. They were raw, ugly, and uncontrolled. The sound of someone realizing too late that they'd broken something unfixable. Miles looked like the weight of the moment had crushed the last of his pride. He sat slumped, drained of the smug confidence that had once defined him. Just another man caught red-handed in a scheme that collapsed. Spectacular. Lithe agents resumed their task, sorting evidence, logging charges, but everything felt different now. Like the gravity in the room had shifted. It wasn't just about indictments anymore. It was about destruction, about loss, the kind that rewrites entire family histories. This wasn't just the fallout of criminal behavior. This was the disintegration of a legacy, the permanent severing of blood ties. In just a few months, decades of love, trust, and unity had been turned into dust as the federal team wrapped up their work. I understood something deeply. My fight with Nora and Miles wasn't over because I beat them. It was over because the truth had finally roared loud enough to drown out all their lies. They tried to erase me, but in doing so, they erased themselves. I never spoke to Nora again after that day in court. Not once. She tried. God, did she try? The phone calls started the same night. My cell kept lighting up every 20 minutes with unfamiliar numbers. Once I stopped answering anything I didn't recognize, she switched to messages. Long, frantic texts that shifted wildly from apologies to accusations, sometimes within a single sentence. Jackson, please, call me. We can talk like adults. I know you're angry, but you don't know what kind of pressure I was under after my father died. Then an hour later, you arrogant bastard. Sitting in a house you didn't earn, living off the pain of others while my family falls apart around me. It would change again. I loved you. I still love you. And I know you love me. We can still fix this. Like we always did. Don't throw away 8 years over one mistake. One mistake. That's what she called it. As if orchestrating a smear campaign to rewrite my service history, siphoning money from charities meant to help combat vets, and trying to wipe out my identity was just a bad decision made in haste. A blip. I didn't waste time reading her words. Past the first few, every message got deleted on sight. I blocked every number she used. When she began flooding my inbox with what read like her raw, unfiltered diary entries, I changed my email address. This was the same woman who once looked at my scars with reverence, told me I was the bravest man she'd ever met. Now she was clawing at any memory that might make me forget what she'd done. But I hadn't forgotten. What stuck with me wasn't the sweet words or the tender moments. It was the way she always had to be right. The way she'd twist arguments until I gave in, not because she was correct, but because she refused to lose. I used to confuse that for passion, that fire, that intensity. But now, in the clarity that came with betrayal, I saw it for what it truly was: a warning sign, a need to dominate, to reshape reality to her liking. And when she couldn't, she burned it down. As for the fallout, it spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours of the arrests, the entire country was watching. Military deception scandal tied to prominent family headlined in USA Today. CNN ran a segment titled "The Veteran Who Chose Silence Over Revenge." Fox News spun it as an attack on patriots by coastal elites. But here's the thing about becoming the center of a media frenzy: you stop hearing the noise after a while. It fades into static. Reporters lined the street outside my house for a week straight, hoping I'd crack and give them something, anything to feed the beast. I gave them nothing. I went back to sanding the porch railing I'd been working on before the storm hit. I watered Franklin's roses. I lived my life like the cameras didn't exist. The silence made them restless. In an age where everyone's desperate to post, to share, to confess in real time, my refusal became a headline in itself. The man who stayed quiet. Suddenly, I was the subject of op-eds about integrity and restraint. The power of saying nothing. And then, the real unraveling began. 3 months after the Courtroom ambush, things started to collapse in earnest. Miles was ousted from Weston Holdings by a board scrambling to preserve their reputations once the FBI began digging into the finances. Turns out, robbing war veterans while representing yourself as a model citizen doesn't sit well with investors. Shocking. The company's value nosedived. Investors bailed. Partners cut ties overnight. Within half a year, the company Franklin had poured his life into, a legacy spanning 3 generations, was on the verge of bankruptcy. Miles had destroyed it chasing money that wasn't his. Nora didn't fare any better. Her legal career blew up in public view. The Oregon State Bar launched a formal investigation, and her license was suspended. When you're caught hiring tech mercenaries to tamper with government documents, you're not just facing disbarment, you're looking at serious prison time. The firm she worked for, the kind with rooftop cocktail hours and corporate retreats in the Alps, dumped her faster than a hot grenade. They didn't just let her go, they erased her name from the website and issued public statements making it crystal clear. She was on her own, and I went back to sanding that same railing, one stroke at a time, the moment the indictments hit. The press, everyone, scrambled to distance themselves from her. Statements were issued by the firm, full of hollow reassurances about ethics and accountability. Overnight, the same people who used to cheer her successes were suddenly acting like they'd never known her. The tech company involved in the tampering faced legal action in several states, their business model ruining veterans' reputations. For cash had finally caught up with them, and they'd picked the wrong target this time. The Department of Defense wasn't treating this like a private matter anymore. It was a breach of national trust, a risk to the security structure itself. Prosecutors weren't holding back. They were determined to make this a lesson, to ensure no one ever thought military records were something you could forge without consequences. What made it all sting with poetic justice was watching Nora and Miles realize too late that all the wealth they'd clung to couldn't shield them from this. The connections they'd leaned on, the social status they'd wielded like armor, none of it mattered now. When federal crimes were involved, last names and private school educations didn't mean a damn thing. 2 weeks after the arrests, Damon filed for divorce. His statement was brief: irreconcilable differences and criminal activity. His legal team pointed out that even if Karen's role had been as minor as logging into a computer at the wrong time, it was enough to shatter any foundation of trust. The same man who'd risked everything by delivering that flash drive had finally severed ties with a family that never truly accepted him. I had never felt much for Damon one way or another, but when I saw those divorce papers make headlines, I found myself respecting him in a way I hadn't before. It takes a rare kind of strength to walk away from privilege when your conscience demands it. He chose what was right over what was easy, and that's something not many people do. The house on the cliff still looked the same. The same gusts of wind still moaned through the windows, and the floorboards still protested underfoot. But something felt different, like Franklin's presence had settled deeper into the bones of the place, as though justice had allowed him some measure of peace. The men and women who'd read about what happened started writing to me. Veterans, people who'd fought their own battles, some literal, some legal, guys who'd been wrongly accused, guys whose service had been mocked or questioned by opportunists, guys who simply understood what I'd stood up for and wanted to say thank you. Those letters, scrawled in careful handwriting or typed out with trembling fingers, meant more than any ribbon ever could. They came from people who knew the cost of loyalty, people who didn't just speak the words honor and duty, they lived them. I didn't keep up with the court process after that. Carmen would update me now and then about how plea deals kept falling apart because the case was ironclad, or how sentencing hearings had devolved into finger-pointing between Nora and Miles. They tried blaming each other for everything. Judges weren't buying it. Appeals were dismissed with barely a glance. But I didn't go to those hearings. I didn't offer statements to the press, didn't show up to speak about the emotional toll. I had already said all that needed saying without uttering a single word. In that courtroom, my silence had carried more weight than any angry speech ever could. It wasn't silence born of spite. It was a shield. Every time they opened their mouths, it was to deceive, to wound, to spin. I had no interest in playing that game. Staying quiet was my way of reclaiming something real. The difference between those who've earned your words and those who don't even deserve the sound of your breath. Franklin used to say that certain things are built to last, and others collapse at the first hard wind. Nora and Miles built theirs on deception, on greed, on the belief that truth could be bent if you had enough money. But real truth doesn't bend, it breaks the ones who try to bend it. When it finally came down on them, it didn't just crack their facade, it leveled everything. I watched it all from a distance. No gloating, no satisfaction, just quiet certainty that the right thing had happened. A year passed. Then, one morning, I picked up a shovel and walked to a small patch of land behind the house. I wasn't doing it for closure. I hate that word. I wasn't doing it because someone told me I should or because it would help with healing. I was doing it because Franklin deserved something real, something permanent, not a tombstone, a tribute, something he would have appreciated. The place I chose was a natural break in the land, where the grass gave way to rockier earth, sheltered by a line of Douglas firs he'd planted back in the 70s. From there, you could see the Pacific endless, shifting, unknowable. Franklin used to say the ocean reminded him of life, wild, constantly changing, deeper than anyone knew. I spent 3 weeks working that ground by hand. No hired help, no shortcuts, just me and the kind of labor that leaves dirt under your nails. And a quiet pride in your chest. Every rock I lifted, every root I cleared, it felt like a conversation with him. Like I was doing something that mattered, something that would last. The man who had believed in me when everyone else turned away deserved something quiet but lasting. The design I chose was simple, something Franklin would have liked. A rough circle of lavender bushes surrounding 3 smooth stones I'd found on the shore just below the cliffside. Lavender, because Margaret once said it was Franklin's favorite, and because its scent pulled me back to summers in my grandmother's backyard in Ohio, when life felt smaller, and people seemed to mean what they said. The stones were each unique, different sizes, different shades, worn by decades of ocean storms. The biggest, about the size of a basketball, I placed at the center. The other two sat on either side like silent guardians. Together, they formed a quiet triangle that felt balanced, like it belonged. No polished plaques, no angel statues or engraved marble. Just 3 stones that had survived the fury of the sea and would likely outlast me too. But it was the bench that took the most work. I built it from cedar Franklin had kept in his old shed, wood he'd been saving for a project he never got the chance to finish. I used joinery techniques he once taught me, mortise and tenon joints, the old-fashioned way. No nails, no shortcuts. Just the kind of work that demands patience and a willingness to keep starting over until it's right. It took me 4 tries before I was satisfied. The first version was too tight. The next one sat awkwardly high. The third was strong but plain. Ugly. Franklin would have had a good laugh watching me curse under my breath. He would have reminded me that real craftsmanship isn't about being perfect, it's about persistence. When I finally got it just right, I carried the bench to the garden and placed it so it faced the ocean, the way Franklin used to sit and watch the horizon melt into the sky. The cedar smelled like the forests of my childhood, clean, pure, real. Over time, I knew it would age to a silvery gray, blending into the landscape the same way the house had. That's when I decided what to carve. I'd been thinking about what to etch into that bench for weeks. Maybe Franklin's name, maybe a quote about honor or justice. But in the end, there was only one word that captured what the last year had taught me, what I'd lost and what I'd clawed back. One word that held it all: truth. I carved it into the wood by hand, slow and careful, just like Franklin taught me to approach anything that mattered. Block letters, deep and wide, set into the top rail of the bench's back. A quiet message, not a slogan, not a monument, just a whisper of something real, something permanent, something worth holding on to. It took 3 days to finish the carving. My fingers, soft from too many years behind a desk, blistered under the pressure, but the ache felt right, like penance, like gratitude. Like I was paying back something I could never truly repay, to the man who taught me what integrity looked like in a world that often forgot. When it was done, I sat there for the first time as the sun sank into the Pacific. The air was filled with that clean lavender scent, soft and calming. The waves moved in slow, rolling rhythms that caught the last orange streaks of sunlight like flickers on glass. I reached into my wallet and pulled out the photo I'd carried since I came home from my unit, from back in Afghanistan. A bunch of kids grinning like we were immortal. Martinez was front and center, probably mid-joke. Thompson had one arm slung around Williams. They were trying to look tough but couldn't hold back their smirks. And there in the back, half hidden, behind the rest, was me, 28 years old, all bones and haunted eyes. That 1,000-yard stare no one really talks about until you've seen too much too fast. 5 of those faces never made it back. 3 more returned, but their minds didn't. The rest of us scattered, different lives, different cities, but always carrying pieces of one another. And that night, with the lavender blooming and the waves hushing the world quiet, something settled in me. They hadn't died in vain. They fell for something that still mattered, something I still believed in. The idea that truth has weight, that it's worth protecting, even when no one believes you, even when it costs you everything. And maybe by fighting back against Nora and Miles, by refusing to let them erase who I was, I'd carried that torch forward, even in a small way. The fire was glowing in the house behind me, painting the windows with gold light. Franklin's home. His voice still lingered in the creak of floorboards, in the warmth of every room. Far down the coast, I could hear the lighthouse horn calling through the fog, warning the ships that wandered too far off course. I don't speak her name anymore, Don't give thoughts to Miles or the family that shattered under their own hunger. What they did nearly broke me, worse than bullets, worse than any desert night in a war zone. But strangely, it made me whole too. They tried to erase me, tried to rewrite who I was, tried to smear my service, my name, my history. They believed power could reshape truth, that lies repeated enough would overwrite the past. But they were wrong. Franklin had been trying to teach me something all along. That some things can't be bought, can't be stolen, can't be faked. You don't hang character on a wall or tuck it into a resume. You build it day by day, choice by choice, especially when everything is on the line. The wood will fade. The lavender will wilt and bloom again. The stones will settle deeper into the earth, and one day, the bench might fall apart. But that word truth will stay etched in the grain, as steady and quiet as the tide. Sometimes, when the wind howls and the walls hum Franklin's quiet music, I sit out there with the photo on my lap and the sea whispering its old stories. I think of the brothers who never came home, of the man who gave me shelter when no one else would, of the silence that followed betrayal and how, in the end, it saved me. They tried to erase me. Instead, I carved myself into the world.